The GTO engine has been repaired, and I'm going to take you through all the steps it took for me to get this thing right on this episode of Josh's Car Corner, sponsored by Improved Racing. So this episode is sponsored by Improved Racing because I used a lot of their parts in the repair of this motor to make sure the oil pressure was good and get this thing right. Improved Racing is a company that makes aftermarket components for a lot of different engines, the LS being one of them, and the goal is to maximize oil control and oil flow in your engine to provide the best lubrication possible when you're using your engine for racing or any kind of performance driving. Back in 2020, I had ordered their crank scraper and windage tray, and I put them on the engine when I was repairing it after the lifter spun on me. And when it came time to fix the engine this time, I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything I could to maximize oil pressure, oil flow, and oil control. So I reached back out to them and got a handful of extra parts that they sell. So you'll see me put all of those parts together as I go through the rebuild of this engine. You're also going to see me correct some mistakes that I made when I put it together 2 years ago, and you're going to see the consequences that come from making those mistakes, because unfortunately there were some parts in here that I had to replace that I wasn't expecting to have to replace, but as a side effect of the low oil pressure, had to replace them. I was very lucky to have the opportunity to take this engine back to a place that, if you are an old-time fan of Josh's Car Corner, you are familiar with. When I put this engine together in 2013 for the first time with the cam, I went to a shop that was right in my local hometown of Green Lake, Wisconsin, called Advanced Engine Concepts. It's just a nondescript shed that's sitting on top of a hill in the northwest corner of Green Lake, but inside there is dozens of years of experience building NASCAR engines, circle track engines, road racing engines, and as well LS engines. They really helped me out, were very generous with their time. So I called them up and they were very generous once again to let me bring the engine to their shop so we could take it apart, figure out what exactly went wrong, and put it all back together properly with professionals helping me the whole way to make sure I didn't make any crucial mistakes. So I'm going to take you now to the footage of me at Advanced Engine Concepts with the engine, figuring out what went wrong, and putting this whole thing back together. Okay, so the motor is coming apart, got the front and rear covers off and the oil pans off, and I might have already found the source of the low oil pressure. I'm just looking at my pickup tube, and if you can see right in there, see how on this side where there's no bolt holding it down, there's a gap? So clearly this mounting ear is bent. Is that enough to cause the low oil pressure? I don't know, but I'm gonna have to consult the experts when they're freed up. Okay, I have the engine as disassembled as it's going to need to be in order to get the crank out. Unfortunately, they aren't going to be able to change the reluctor wheel with me here today. They're going to have to do that during the week. But I do want to show you the differences between the two gears so you can at least see what it looks like and how they are different. So here, it's always on the back of the crank, but here is what a 24X wheel looks like. And if you look at it, it almost looks like it's two separate gears in one. And you get raised and lowered sections opposing each other. And I'm not quite sure how that works, but somehow it does, but it only reads 24 samples off of that. So this right here is the 58X wheel. This literally has 58 teeth going all the way around it and a gap of 2 teeth right at the top there. And these holes in it, I don't know if they mean anything. The sensor definitely doesn't read that. I don't think it does anyway. That's probably for some kind of balancing or just lightning, but it's those points right there, or teeth, that are actually read by the sensor, which lives right down here. I have the old one removed right now because I thought it might get in the way. But that is what is going to get put on the crankshaft. So once we got the crankshaft out of the motor, we unfortunately discovered that with the low oil pressure there was some damage, and all that damage was absorbed right here by the main bearings. So if you look right here, you have a top and a bottom shell. The bottom ones have got the oil control holes in them, and then the top ones don't have any holes in them at all. This middle one that's a lot bigger, that's your thrust bearing. That's the one that lives in the middle of the crankshaft. So these bearings, which used to be made by Clevite but are now owned by a company called Mowell, have got a composite of metals built into them to offer a minimum of friction and a maximum of lubricity. And because of the lack of oil pressure down there, there was some damage. You can see right here, especially on the middle bearings. See how you can see copper here? That's the coating was getting rubbed right off because of the lack of oil pressure. And the top of the thrust bearing took the worst of the damage. Look how much copper there is there. Fortunately, the journals on the crankshaft were fine. They didn't have to be reduced in size. We didn't even have to polish them up. They didn't suffer any damage. All I had to do was go get another set of bearings, which I was able to get from O'Reilly's, and we put them back in and put it back together. Everything mic'd out and everything, as far as that goes, will be fine. So now I'm going to go to the point of cleaning the crankshaft off. See, one of the advantages of being at a performance shop like that is they have all the tooling and all the proper equipment to clean things properly. So I've actually got a beautiful parts washing machine I got to use, and a heat and a hot water tank, because once you're done cleaning, you got to spray all that stuff off. And using high pressure steam water is the best way to clean metallic parts off once you're done messing with them. So you'll see that a little bit. I admit I skipped the part of putting the crankshaft back in because with all the rods and pistons floating around in there, it was a complicated, slow back and forth process of getting everything lined up and bolted down and torque specs. And because I'm never gonna put a crankshaft into an engine normally because I don't trust myself with that bottom end, all those tight tolerances, I'm not gonna show it to you and I'm not gonna tell you torque specs or anything like that. If you wanna tackle that on your own, plenty of other videos on the internet to show you how to do that. So we'll go back to the footage, you'll see the crank getting washed, and then all of a sudden it'll be in the engine, and we'll proceed from there. Okay, so I'm back in the shop. It's actually a week after I tore the crank out of the thing, but it's sitting right here, and you can see the new gear is on it. So I can't show you the process of putting it on live, but Paul, who put this on, explained the process to me, so I'm going to show it to you. So this is the tool that you actually use to put the gear on. So what it does is, one of the holes in the back of the crankshaft, that bolt goes into, and then this matches up to one of the holes on the gear, and this is what actually lines it up. So this 7th hole right here on the crankshaft, the one that isn't tapped, that is where this thing pilots up. So you slide this on the back of the crankshaft, and then it goes in that one hole that's by itself, which is lined up right there, and it lines up with a pilot hole right there on the reluctor wheel, and this is what aligns the thing so it reads properly once you stab it back in the engine. But the new gear is on, so I got some new bearings. We're going to go through the process of putting the crankshaft back in the block. Okay, I have now got the timing set put back in. This is the new 4X cam gear to run the 58X system. And I just got done replacing the crank position sensor because when it's 58X, it's a 5-volt sensor, and when it's 24X, it's a 12-volt sensor, so you actually do have to change it. So now I need to start going through the process of explaining some of the mistakes I made when I put this thing together last time and correcting them as I go. So the first off is this guy. So this is the cam retainer plate, and it's behind the gear, so you can't see it. But this is the original one. And when I mean original, I mean it was original to the motor. I had this motor apart twice and never changed this retainer plate. And as you can see, it's got this red seal in it. This thing is smashed pretty much flat. I'm not entirely sure that was sealing anything up anymore. So when I put the new one in, I ran my finger across it, and it had a nice raised edge to it. So now it's got a proper seal in there again. There is an oil galley behind this cam gear that runs along both sides of the cam, and if this seal is bad, it can leak oil out there. Not enough to create massive pressure loss, but enough that you could lose some amount of pressure. So this is the first thing that I replaced in the hope of fixing this oil pressure problem. So now we got to put the new oil pump on, and there's another mistake I made. So to do this properly, you really need to align the pump. Inside the oil pump, there is a gear that runs around on the cam, but then outside of that is this cavity that is also shaped like a gear. And the way this thing works is the internal gear spins and it grabs gulps of oil and swirls them around the pump and then shoots them out the other side on the backside here. Well, I never aligned this thing properly, and when you align it, you're supposed to put 15 10,000 feeler gauges all around it to make sure this gear is absolutely centered, because what it does is it centers the whole body in the right position, and then you bolt it down with the 4 bolts. So I've got a new pump in this bag right here, and that's the next thing we're going to do, is put a brand new pump on. Okay, the oil pump is aligned, it's bolted down. Now on to the next mistake that I made. So what happened is, because the ear was bent, it made it sit like that, and it was sitting crooked on the pump. And the guys are telling me that is why I had low oil pressure, because there was a gap there. Even though the seal is in there, the seal's not sitting in there straight, it's sucking air, and that is why I was having low oil pressure, and that's why all the problems occurred. So to make sure that doesn't happen again, I'm going to use the thing that I should have gotten from Improved Racing the first time, which is this. This is an oil pump pickup tube mounting bracket. So what this does is, you've got the one ear hole right here, and that's all that holds the pump normally. You put this guy on the other side, and it presses down. There is another hole on the back corner of the pump here. Now it's held down on both sides, and it makes sure that this surface is maintained and stays absolutely flat, so you don't have any crazy gaps, and then you won't have any air getting sucked up in there. So this is what I'm going to put on now. And just like that, so got 2 brand new bolts in there too, 106 inch-pounds or 8.8 foot-pounds if your torque wrench doesn't go that low. And then the bolt back here also happens to be one of the bolts that holds the windage tray down, 18 foot-pounds. So there you go. Now I am ready. A couple engine covers to throw on front and rear, and I'll be ready to put the pan back on. One more thing I want to show you quick before I start bolting this on. So when I did this last time, I did the procedure where I bolted the pan down with no gasket to help align this front cover on. That'll only align it vertically here. So the proper way to do this, and because I'm at an engine shop, I have access to this tool, is to use the front cover alignment tool. And this only works if you have a seal in there, but you press that in there. Now the seal is perfectly centered on the crank. Now I can bolt it down. One last thing to show before I put the rear cover on. So this right here is what's called the barbell. So what this does is, I spin the motor around here, it directs oil flow around the back of the block. So you see these 2 passages right here that are cast into the block. Here's the main oil feed for the whole block. Oil is supposed to come down here, go into a filter, but this is not a rear sump, so instead it transfers up here, then goes through the filter, then comes back, then it's supposed to go up. And this barbell is supposed to direct, because this is just a hole in the block, so the barbell directs oil flow. Well, the factory one is plastic, and it's not the greatest design, so Improved Racing also makes this new updated billet one that's much thicker and better at controlling oil flow. See how much bigger the front side is versus the back side on the factory one? So I'm going to shove this guy in there, and then that will also improve oil flow. To get the factory one out, there's a galley right here. You pop a plug out right here, and you can get in there with a tool and you can pop the old one out, and it'll push the new one in. But Improved Racing takes it a step further with the new one. So they cast threads, or put threads in it too. So if you ever need to pull it out, you just put a screw in there and yank it right out. So much better than the factory. Almost done. So I just got done taking the oil pan apart and cleaning it up in the parts washer and blowing it dry. Now, the other thing I'm doing is I'm replacing this gasket and this gasket right here. I didn't replace them before, so might as well since I'm in here. And I'm going to be adding another Improved Racing part. So we got this adapter block right here. So what this is going to enable me to do is add an oil temp sensor in that block right there. It's got multiple inlets and outlets for a bunch of different things. It's got one here on the bottom, and then the through port right here. But then the big port is the one that's important, because that's the only one that you can has to be used when you have this thing on here. The other two you can block off if you're not using them. So slide that guy on there, and I got another gasket to put on there, and then I'll be ready to put the pan back on. All right, we are about to prime the engine the way the professionals do. So there's another oil galley port right here. It's right past the oil pump. So we're going to use compressed air. this tank is full of fresh oil. It's just gonna blast the oil into the engine, through the pump, down the conduit on the side of the block, up into everything. So this is how the pros do it. So we'll be doing it in a second here. So when it's done, which valve do I shut? The top one or the...
When you're getting really close, say something and then I'll...
Okay.
But you just screw that guy in.
Okay. I'll just...
You just don't want it to get below that, otherwise you'll introduce air into the system and then we just wasted a time.
Right. Okay. Well, I will let you know when she's...
get a little bit of oil that'll come out the bolt holes there.
Oh, okay. Sure, because yeah. Okay, well, we have found one small leak with this pressure priming. My brand new sensor is leaking right there, so not sure why that's happening, but we'll have to pull it back out after priming is done and try to seal it so it doesn't leak anymore. So fortunately, after the pressure priming, we figured out that what it was the new sensor just wasn't tightened down as far as it needed to be. It needed to get screwed in there a little more. Once we tightened that up, everything was fine. I also wanted to point out too that this sensor also comes from improved racing. This is actually the engine oil temp sensor out of a C5 Corvette, and then they just changed the wiring on it to this more generic Delphi GT150 connector, and you can get the other end of this from anything, which I will. I'm probably going to have an extra one on the Camaro harness, so I'm just going to run another pair of wires. I know which pins I need to go to, and I'll run it down with the alternator wiring so I can then plug this in and have it fed back to the computer, and I'll have an engine oil temp sensor eventually. I also wanted to point out that on this particular block, I noticed it's got these two extra ports on it, and I was trying to figure out what the heck are these for. Well, this is all a pressurized galley out here, so all that's coming through here is pressure, so this has no ability to draw. So what these two ports could potentially be for is oil feed lines for turbos, because you have two of them, or you could do one turbo, I suppose, as well. And if you had a really massive turbo, you could use this top port to feed one big single turbo and then return back to the pan somewhere. You just have to drill a hole in it. They make all kinds of different blocks too. They make ones for an oil cooler because on this side, it's pressure coming out of the filter, and then over here, it's the feed going into the block. So they make a different one that's actually got two ports on it, so you can come straight out of the filter, go through an oil cooler, and then come back and then feed the block. That's another option too, and it's all done up here in the front, and because they designed this stuff to be used with the GTO, it'll clear the alternator and everything over here too. So it's a great way to run an oil cooler system if you're making enough heat, or you find out you're making enough heat that you need to also cool the oil as well. So that's going to do it for now. All I need to do now is start putting all of the other pieces back on the engine, flywheel, clutch. I got to put the proper bolt in here and just start putting this motor back together. And in the next episode, with any luck, she'll be ready to fire. I'll have everything put back on, and we'll be able to find out if Project E38 is going to work, if proof of concept will be achieved. I'm pretty confident that it will be, and I'm pretty confident that the next episode you see will be me firing this thing up and getting ready to enjoy 2022 in the GTO. I want to give a huge thank you to Improved Racing for sponsoring this episode, and another huge shout out to Advanced Engine Concepts for allowing me to come in there and work on this when they've got much bigger things going on their day-to-day life. So once again, thanks for watching Josh's Car Corner. We'll see you soon.